Here on the People's Parliament, hold Parliament accountable. People's Parliament, remember, is a weekly parliamentary accountability broadcast brought to you by Parliamentary Network Africa. Parliamentary Network Africa is a civil society organization that monitors activities in Parliament, including ensuring that parliaments are open, transparent, accountable, and include citizens in their work. Today, we are discussing, or we're taking a look at 2 years into the mandate of the current 8th Parliament. Has it lived up to expectation? What are the perspectives that citizens have to share? And joining me for this conversation is Ibrahim Alhassan. Ibrahim is a country correspondent for the EIB network. Ibrahim has been monitoring Parliament for many years, and of course, part of this ongoing 8th Parliament. Ibrahim has been in Parliament every single, at least he shares some interesting perspectives with us in that regard. Ibrahim, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Most welcome, Tommy. Thank you for having me.
Very well. And then also joining us on today's broadcast, Abraham. Apologies for the technical hitch in sound. Abraham also works with the Institute of Electoral Studies. He's director at the Institute of Electoral Studies. He's a policy analyst. Abraham joins us to also share some perspective. Abraham, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great. And then, of course, we also have Peter Kofi. Peter is founding president of the Institute for Liberty and Policy Innovation. Peter is connecting. When he does, we will zoom straight to him. So I'll start with you. Abraham, because, of course, as somebody who works within the election space, the Institute for Electoral Studies, when elections 2020 happened, when Electoral Commission declared the results, when you realize that there's been 137 seats for the NPP, 137 for the NDC, and one independent candidate separating them, what were the thoughts that ran through your mind? I mean, how did that jump at you?
Well, I must say it's a great pleasure to join your forum, and it's a fine opportunity for us to share ideas and our thoughts on and help with the development process. For me, I feel that we are where we are because over the years there have been a particular public perception about the work of Parliament and parliamentarians, in the sense that the general Ghanaian population was of the view that parliamentarians were not scrutinizing or taking the work of Parliament quite seriously. I mean, they were just there to enjoy the perks that came with the position. And so we got to this junction of a tie, I believe, as a form of a protest by the voting public. And being heavily involved in the electoral process, as you mentioned, it wasn't very surprising because the writings were clearly on the wall. There was a lot of disgruntled voters who had written on one or many other platforms about what they were going to do, the phenomenon of skirt and blouse. And so you can confidently conclude that indeed, in as much as the expectation of the Ghanaian voting public was that a hung parliament was going to lead to greater scrutiny and perhaps give Parliament a better image of seriousness, it hasn't really come as good news for the government, because there are instances where we are told that it is not actually helping the business of government. So for me, I mean, having monitored the trends over the years and having been involved in various capacities dealing with the election management bodies, I was not very surprised, because some of the seats that were retained or lost, clearly the signs were written on the wall.
Right. So certainly you describe it as the result of some form of protest by the electorate, really, to make the ruling class realize that citizens cannot be taken for granted. We expect better than we are receiving, and what have you. Of course, His Excellency the President described it as a way through which Ghanaians were telling the ruling class that they needed to work together and they needed to serve the people better. Ibrahim, I can imagine, were in the House on the 9th that the Parliament was inaugurated. Of course, for the benefit of our viewers, and of course for you as a journalist who is able to give pictorial, description of events. Can you give us help us recall, the events from the 9th of the 6th of January right through the early hours of the 7th of January from a parliamentary correspondent's perspective? Do I still have Ibrahim on? Ibrahim, you are muted, so you may have to unmute because I cannot hear you.
Yes, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Ibrahim. Please go ahead.
Okay. So,
yes.
like I was saying, it didn't come to some of us who covered the 7th Parliament as a surprise at all. Because prior to the 2020 elections, some of us had from interactions with constituents, looking at the data of the 2016 election and the numbers that brought some MPs into the House in the 7th Parliament, tell that the ruling government was going to have a torrid time maintaining the majority. In fact, some of us openly said that for the parliamentary elections, it was going to be in the bag for the opposition then, that was the NDC. What was, however, unclear was the presidential. So the figures, the numbers did not come to some of us as a surprise at all. Now back to your question on January 7th. Yes, of course. I'm sure we all are aware that after the elections, it was not clear as to which side constituted the minority, which side constituted the majority. So there who sits on the right side of the speaker, who sits on the left side of the speaker. That became very controversial. And it was left to the might of the individuals making up the size. So if you remember, the minority then from the 7th Parliament, that's the NDC MP, had moved to sit on the right side of the speaker. Is that indicating that they had won the majority, even though the independent MP for Mina, Andrew Esiama, had then decided to focus with the NP, giving them a majority, a slim majority of 130. Of course, we all know the drama that took place even before the drama of all dramas on the D-Day for the election of the speaker, which delayed. Of course, I've covered Parliament, like we said, for more than 8 years, 10 years thereabout, and you can tell that the longest time it's ever taken for a Parliament to get a speaker will be for this 8th Parliament, which saw Alban Bagbin elected. And like as you are aware, Carlos Akura decided after the election, vote with some ballot paper, choose some of them. He was chased, some slaps on the back took place. And so it was dramatic, and to even use the word dramatic will be another understatement. But it was all said and done. We had a speaker, we had the first deputy speaker, without much qualms, second deputy speaker, same, and the House was constituted. And I'm sure felt it get into the disappointment or otherwise of how the 8th Parliament has panned out so far is down the line.
Very well, and yeah, that certainly, Ibrahim, was a picture that helps us to recount the activities of the day. I personally was in the House on that evening through to the morning. Yes, I saw the buses bring the NDC members of Parliament all robed in white to come in early so they can be able to take their seats on the majority side because there was a battle between who becomes majority, who becomes minority. Of course, there were the issues on whether the court's ruling, the court injunction, was going to be held. What was going to be the Clerk of Parliament's indication on the subject matter, and what have you. All of these were very important matters that came up. I noticed that we've been able to have Peter joining us. Peter is founding president of the Institute for Liberty and Policy Innovation. Peter, thank you very, very much for making time to join us on the People's Parliament. We've been checking up with Ibrahim and also with Abraham on the issues surrounding the election of 137 members of parliament on the MPP side, same numbers on the NDC side, and how that particular information came to them when the elections were over. May you also share your thoughts? How did you get the news, and how did you take it? Knowing that we've never experienced a situation where we've not had the overwhelming majority that the ruling party has usually had. Peter.
Right. So a very good evening to my co-panelists. Unfortunately, I joined very late, but I've enjoyed a bit of what others have said. So on the night of the election of the Speaker of Parliament, we could all attest to the fact that we all wanted something quite different from the normal. Looking at the previous parliament we've had. So having a hung parliament was something we were all happy about, because we are going to have a proper scrutiny of government programs, government policies, bills sent to parliament. So it is not just even the word proper, but taking critical look at budgets, how expenditure should be disbursed, administered, budgets brought to parliament, how we are going to well look at it to ensure that it serves the purpose. But look, it is this very parliament that we have the most wasteful kind of expenditure ever. It is this parliament that we also experience back and forth in the form of delaying budget passage. You see, to scrutinize, to examine, to ensure that all these policies brought to parliament are well catered for, to ensure that people's livelihood, to ensure that it serves the intent of the policies or the budgets. That's not what we see now, because the notion was to delay budgets, delay policies, delay bills in parliament, but not to examine or not to scrutinize. So you could see the fact that when budgets were sent to parliament, if you look at e-levy, the time of e-levy, you look at the time of first budget in 2022, there was just a delay in the passage, but not properly scrutinizing them one after the other to ensure that it serves the intent. So though we've had a hung parliament, which could have been quite a different parliament for us to learn from it going forward, we rather seen a retrogression in all actions of what we've seen in parliament. So to me, I've got the news to have a hung parliament because I've stayed out of UK, where UK in 2010 had a hung parliament. Therefore, it's been for several times, I think 3 or 5 times. And you could see that anytime such hung parliament happens in UK, there is that proper scrutiny and there is that consensus. The consensus are built for scrutiny. But here, the consensus are not built, basically not for scrutiny, but basically to ensure that certain bills are passed, not necessarily under certificate of agency, but they are passed to ensure the government in power is able to have those things go through, administer and disburse funds for the purpose of whatever they want to achieve. So to me, the hung parliament couldn't serve the purpose in terms of the scrutiny, because I'm much interested in the examining the scrutiny and to ensure that policies, bills, and budgets serve the intent. And at the same time, also to make sure that policies sent there are able to well diagnose, identify the gaps, and solve the livelihood issues. But this is not what we saw. So you see, the uniqueness of this parliament is that you have no majority in parliament, and you have an opposition leader who is also the Speaker of Parliament. This brings in a very wonderful kind of parliament we have in this republic. But the delay tactics of this hung parliament is not the meaning of examination. I mean, it doesn't serve the purpose of examining. It doesn't serve the purpose of scrutiny. Because if you want to delay a budget, you want to delay a bill, you want to delay a policy, it doesn't mean that you are examining. So all budgets over the years, I mean, through this hung parliament, it has been delayed. You've seen them being delayed all the time. At the end of the day, there's a high wastage. And there's a high kind of confrontations in parliament that have even led to the separation or the change in parliament in terms of the minority caucus. So you have Haruna leaving for others to come. So if we really have a hung parliament serving the purpose of scrutiny per whatever is happening in other countries, then we could have not been recording huge kind of wastage, because it is the same hung parliament that we had the Ukraine war, it's the same hung parliament that we have the COVID-19, and this same hung parliament that we are also having the debt restructuring, and at this same parliament. So what went wrong that the hung parliament could not help us save this country out of debt restructuring? What happened that this hung parliament could not help us, I mean, step through the COVID-19? It is this same parliament that we are all to some extent blaming Ukraine, Russia war for our woes. You see, so it tells you that the hung parliament is there for consensus building over proper scrutiny of government budgets, policies, and bills.
Very well, Bismarck. So the issue still comes back. I mean, and you have raised the issue about how, in your opinion, this matter of hung parliament, has its own, implications on the nature of government business and how, successful or smooth government business is going on or otherwise, which is a very important, valid point that you have raised. And I think it is going to form the basis of, some of the considerations that we are going to be having today. So what I hear you three gentlemen say, as part of your preliminary comments, number one, I hear Abraham mention that, this whole 8th parliament that we have is a result of some protest situation by the people of Ghana to be able to show the people in power that, we're not very excited about the kind of governance that we are receiving, especially from a parliamentary perspective. We think that parliament will be able to do better, and we believe that our parliament should be doing better for us. Then, of course, IB tells us about how the writings were on the wall. Going around with the parliamentarians of the 7th parliament, you could clearly see that many of them were going to lose their seats because they were not doing the things that the people were expecting them to be doing and what have you. And then, of course, we now have the final perspective that has been shared on the fact that these kind of parliament that we seem to have seem to be having an effect on the quality of work that Parliament is churning out. And that then brings me to the next side of the conversation. I come to you, IB. Now you have monitored the 7th Parliament, you have monitored the 8th Parliament. Is it true when people say that this current 8th Parliament is not as effective as even its predecessor Parliament, the 7th, or even parliaments that came before it? Is it true, or it's just a pigment of people's imagination simply because we've not been seeing the work of Parliament filigadoji?
Well, Sami, first of all, I think we need to put things into perspective. Now, we came from the 7th Parliament where the governing party had an overwhelming majority. So those types of parliaments are parliaments you can describe as rubber stamps, and we witnessed a number of them. Now, when I talk about perspectives, what I'm saying is that in Parliament, whether it's an overwhelming majority Parliament or not, their point of disagreement are just less than 5%. Throughout the life of any Parliament, the points of disagreement between a minority and majority are less than 5%. And I did say sometimes you can place them around 2%. For the rest of the business of Parliament, it's by agreement, it's by consensus. Now, what I refute clearly in no uncertain terms is an assertion that the hung nature of the 8th Parliament has made it ineffective. What I refute in no uncertain terms will be an assertion that the delay of the budget, and let's take it, there's only one budget that has been delayed. What delayed the budget is because the content of that particular budget, and he was talking about the 2022 budget, there was e-levy in there, among other revenue mobilization measures. What occasioned the delay? The delay was because the minority was opposed to e-levy. Even before the minority could oppose to the e-levy, the general public had mounted a spirited opposition against the e-levy. And just as has always been in the history of the fourth Republican dispensation of Ghana, the opposition seeks to side with the public because that's where the votes are. Let's take it. So therefore, the opposition re-echoed the sentiment of the general public that we have two forms of taxes. When you look at e-levy, you cannot place it in any of these forms of taxes. So on that specifically, that's what caused the delay. Down 2 years, 3 years down the line, Sammy, I dare say that that position has been vindicated because the e-levy and its targets were not met. The finance minister has had to come back to parliament to review downwards the rates. And again, during that particular process, there was equally an opposition. The opposition was to the scrapping of the daily threshold of 100 Ghana cedis exemption. And here I'll point to you one benefit of the 8th Parliament. That resistance yielded results. So the 100 Ghana cedis threshold got maintained. Again, the rate dropped to 1%. That's the dividends. Again, if you remember, there was this AKE AGM energy deal with the GNPC, which came to Parliament sometime in 2021. Again, there was an opposition, there was scrutiny, and then the agreement was passed, but with a condition. And this was the time that the minority majority all agreed that before the agreement could be effected, those conditions should be met, including an audit of the wells that were being sold, AKE Energy and then AGM petroleum wells that or oil blocks that were being sold to GNPC. Years down the line, AGM, which was going to sell 70% of its stake in this deal to GNPC for $7 million, has packed bag and baggage and left this block to the country without even taking a penny, because there is no economic viability as far as this block is concerned. Again, I'll point to you the benefit of the 8th Parliament. Without this scrutiny, the state, through GNPC, was going to pay $700 million to AGM for a field, an oil field that had no economic viability. So that's one. So when I tell you that the 8th Parliament will be that of a mixed bag, that's exactly what I'm saying. Our perception that Parliament has not done anything, especially the 8th Parliament, is because of what we've seen over the years. But like I said, if you are closer to the scene, you realize that the points of agreement are much more overwhelmingly than the point of disagreement. Talk about the approval of the ministers. Eventually, there was a consensus, especially on that of the finance minister. I've always maintained that the reason that was given by the opposition, especially through the general secretary, just as indicated that Ken Ofori-Atta has created a mess. Approve him and let him go and then answer for his mess or address his mess or deal with his mess, carry his cross. In the interest of the country, I would say that's not a good reason, because that would be a selfish reason. But you flip the coin, the narrative, and say that Parliament had blocked the approval of Ken Ofori-Atta as the finance minister. If Parliament had blocked the approval of Ken Ofori-Atta, the finance minister, and we are where we are today, given the economic challenges we find ourselves in, the governing party can easily point to the fact that there was a certain economic risk kid who was manning the finance ministry, and his name was Ken Ofori-Atta. Because Parliament did not allow him to continue, that's why we are where we are. So, Sammy, it's a mixed bag. And
Now, I mean, you have given some very interesting examples. Of course, you've described it as a mixed bag. And yes, these are very interesting examples, a bit from approvals on international agreements relating to oil and gas through to Kenneth Wiate's approval as finance minister and its implications if the approval had not gone through, and the scrutiny of budgetary decisions and policies, including e-levy and all of that. That's interesting. It means that from where you sit as a parliamentary correspondent, you don't think that it's all terrible. You don't think it is all bad and gloomy. You think that there's been some very good positives that have arisen as a result of we having this kind of parliament. But is that the same impression you have, Abraham, of the current parliament? And then I'll come to Peter also with the same question. Has this parliament really done as much, as well as Ibrahim seeks to make us understand?
Well, I certainly agree with him that it's been a mixed bag. We have had the positives when it comes down to certain particular parliamentarians. Even if you watch their level of interaction with their constituents now, it has certainly changed, and they have upped their game. When you look at some of the policy decisions that were challenged, I mean, if we had an absolute majority for the ruling government, we would have had the same old scenario where every bill that went there would have just gone through without any proper scrutiny. I can bet $1 that there were some bills in the past that have gone through Parliament that if you were to pinpoint some parliamentarians to ask them some technical details, they will be at sea as to exactly what the content was. So I feel that, in as much as it hasn't hastened government business, it has been a much needed wake-up call. It has been a much needed rod that has straightened the indisciplined child in the room, and it has brought up some benefit as he has outlined. I mean, why were we going to pay Aker Energy all that money for what work done? I mean, the oil is ours anyway to begin with. So we having the absolute majority, yes, hastens government business, but it always gave the impression as if we were just there wishy-washying everything that came and then rolling it along. I certainly am impressed coming from the perspective of the electorate and their interests, and I can tell you that I go to places in my line of work, and I see the activity level of MPs and prospective MPs. Certainly the narrative has changed, the attention has become better. There are weekly meetings here and there, and for me, that is a very big positive from the hung parliament that we have had this time around. I mean, 30 years, and we needed this at a point.
Right. Peter, do you agree with the two gentlemen on their summary, really, of how this 8th Parliament has performed, or do you hold a different view?
Right. So yes, from what you've said, I do really do agree with what they have aligned, because to some extent we've experienced some positives in terms of droning down certain policy that could have also brought judgment debts, that could have taken a lot of money from our coffers. So you see, we cannot just shoot the bird down and say it's already dead. You know, it can surface when you don't go faster to pick it up. So we can't just say the parliament had done nothing at all. Irrespective of what we have experienced, those of us watching on TV, others in the streets, reading the news or listening to radio. Yes, when you go close up, what Ibrahim said, you will see that there have been some interesting positives, and there have been places where we have saved a lot. For me, I'm looking at the wastage, and I'm looking at judgment debts and how we are able to save money, because everything's about money. You know, democracy is about using money to run it. So when taxpayers' contributions are going into the drain, you and I will obviously complain, and we will hold government and parliament accountable. But to me, I agree on those positives. But one popular thing that the parliament could have saved us had to be with the abolishment of the e-levy. Yes, parliament did well to even to some extent reduce it from 1.7 to 1.5, which is also a very good thing because we're all crying over the levy. So for parliament to even fight this and bring it down, you saw it got to a point the whole public was somehow quiet on it when you got to 1.5. But when it was 1.7 and above, the whole country, I mean, we're all talking about it here and there. No one was quiet. The market women are all talking about it. But the moment 1.5 came in and it was in the budget, I mean, everyone was like, yes, okay, let's go for it. And this was also done by this hung parliament. So even though more is taken from us in terms of taxes through parliament, to some extent, more also has been done to reduce such burden. To some extent, too, we've seen this hung parliament pushing and pushing for something to be done about tax exemptions, because over the years, we've seen huge tax exemptions going into the hands of business companies that could pay taxes rather than those who can't pay taxes. So this hung parliament is pushing so hard that that bill will be passed, and also to ensure that the reduction in how tax exemptions are given out would also be looked at. And it is the same hung parliament that has done that for us. Now, you could also see that this same hung parliament, to some extent, that has also made appointees so difficult to be made. And it was this hung parliament that we saw the reduction in government size from 120 to about 88. You see, so, and when that was done, we saw how the appointment committee started to talk, to scrutinize these individuals appointed, unlike previously where it was just a matter of delaying. So we could count a lot of positives, and we could also look at some few things that didn't go wrong, which I think Ibrahim was saying is a misbag, which is true, it is. We could have that mixed feelings for parliament. So in as much as we could condemn parliament one way or the other for their actions in parliament in terms of jojoing and other things, we don't have enough of them. We could also count the positives for them, which I do agree with it. Only we had wanted to see more than what we thought of because of having a Speaker of Parliament from the opposition and also having same number of MPs except one independent. So if we had had more, I think this parliament would have had all the applause from the CSOs, from the media, and from the general public. But because we see it in a way that certain things could have been abolished, but e-levy could have been the one everybody wanted to be abolished. If we had abolished e-levy, I'm quite certain that people will really clap more than what you've seen. If we had also seen the fact that tax exemptions could have also been reduced drastically for us to see the impact, because currently we cannot measure the impact of tax exemptions. Is to some extent in this same parliament, if you could recall, that we are having the highest ever budget. You know, in 2021, we had about 137 billion, and this time we are going over 200 billion, and that's quite huge. So that is where the questions then comes in. Look, why are we having this huge, even if we have huge budget, if we are having less appointees? What is so much that we have to go in for a lot of budget to run this country? So apart from the positives, right, we can count the debt restructuring. We can count government going to the IMF. What happened? Why Parliament sat down for government to look at debt restructuring, looking at taking people's bonds away. Now there's huge rates being cut on all the financial investments. What's the name? Fixed deposit, the rate is down now. If you look at Treasury bill, the rate is also coming down. And then our CD to dollar, what happened to all this? So though the positive to some extent we can measure, we can equally also measure that of the negatives. But right, if you look at the negative impact against the positive, that is what we've seen in the economy. So if the negative impacts are overweighing the positive impacts, you could see that the economy would have been more stable than what we see. Therefore, even if you have more positives from Parliament, the little negatives we are recording is shadowing all the positives. And that is why we can see what is happening in the economy in terms of debt restructuring.
So what I hear you three gentlemen say then is that we seem to have a consensus that this 8th Parliament has not been bad, and that things could have been worse if we didn't have the kind of Parliament that we currently have, which is exiting the kind of scrutiny, greater scrutiny that it is exiting, and that the kind of Parliament that we have has certainly served as a wake-up call on the executive branch to do better, and things could have really been bad. It doesn't mean that there's not been the low points, of the current Parliament, and I think that's what I hear you all say, which is pretty interesting. Now we'll be taking a quick break. When I come back, we've heard about the greater positives. I just want us to also narrow down on a few specifics. People say that one of the things that makes, and I think that Peter ended on that score, that whereas the positives are ongoing, like we have all seen and we've all mentioned, it looks like the few negatives that seem to get into the public domain seem to overshadow a lot of the positives. And Parliament does not seem to be doing much in erasing those negatives. I mean, we saw the debacle of the 7th of January 2021, and the fact that till date we have not heard anything. Maybe IB can tell us whether, as parliamentary correspondents, they've heard something when we come back from the break. We have seen the fisticuffs that took place during the budget approval period in that same year, and we've not seen any parliamentarian punish. We've seen absenteeism in parliament raised a few times, many times. Some parliamentarians are falling culprits, yet, nobody seemed to have been punished, and the issue seemed to be swept under the carpet, and so on and so forth. So when we come back from our break, we'll be delving into these matters and seeing whether, these matters have been worth our while. But, well, I think that I get a signal from production that we still have to stay on a little bit even before the break. So it gives us some more time to discuss that. So, Ivy, let me come to you. All the positives, great. But from a PR perspective, from the optics that the public see, has Parliament done enough to make the public recognize or, revere it as a Parliament that is working for the people? Citing the examples of the debacles that have happened, and maybe if you have some latest to share on what you know as parliamentary correspondents on these issues and how Parliament has resolved them.
Well, Sami, I can tell you recently another one happened, but fortunately for Parliament as an institution, it was behind closed doors, and that's during the committee of the whole sitting, where the report of the special budget committee on the new ECCI was being tabled, which generated a whole lot of glory, nearly resulted in another fisticuffs, because of course the officials of the Electoral Commission were there.
Oh, they almost fought again, eh?
They almost fought again. Fortunately for Parliament as an institution, there was no camera there. The media were not party to this particular sitting or meeting, and so this could not come out. Nonetheless, in the subsequent engagements and sittings, the speaker himself related to what happened and sounded a word of caution to the MPs. And of course, this is something he's been doing for some time now, seen as a brain power, not the power of the blow. And that if the numbers are even and equal, what can get one side to win is by exhibiting prowess of the brain, i.e., making your case and making it so convincingly that maybe your other members on the other side who agree with you. But of course, these are the things that we can say chip something away from the image of the 8th Parliament. This Parliament was ushered into existence through a fight, and I mean physical exchanges. The Speaker saved, and since then, the numbers, instead of getting the House to realize that let's do things differently, let's judge up more, let's engage behind the closed doors, behind the scenes before we come to the plenary. It's always been heated exchanges on the floor, especially when it comes to matters that split heads, like I talked about the controversial CI, other revenue mobilization. In fact, from tomorrow, the House is equally going to deal with 3 other revenue generation or revenue mobilization measures. And these are conditions by the IMF for the country to get the $3 billion bailout. This particular, I'm talking about these bills, they've been outstanding because of, once again, the numbers. The minority insisted that if nothing is done to the CI, especially the clause that jettisons the guarantor system into the dustbin, they were not going to avail themselves and then approve these 3 revenue generation bills that are conditioned precedent before the IMF board level agreement. That's one. 2, you're also aware that for about a month now, 6 nominees of President Akufo-Addo have been vetted. They've not been approved because the NDC, through its leadership, has directed its MPs not to approve them. Somebody will say, okay, MPP has 138. So if NDC has 136 now because sending off is in abeyance because the situation has now to come to Parliament by the Supreme Court, then MPP should just go ahead and marshal its 138 and get these nominees approved. Sammy, unfortunately, it's not that easy because the majority is equally struggling to marshal its numbers. And that's how come on 2 separate occasions, one of the vetted nominees, Katie Hammond, who's headed to the Trade Ministry, has had to stand up on the floor and register his disappointment in the process. Yes, so yes, these are the downsides to the evenness of the numbers. Instead of it getting them to judge and agree more, it's getting them to, many of them, to become hotheads and take entrenched positions when it comes to matters like this. And I think this is left at the doorsteps of both leadership, minority, majority leadership, in sitting down and dialoguing more, so we don't see many of these disagreements manifest publicly.
Yeah, and certainly it is the general public that gets to suffer in the end if government business is held up unnecessarily, because of the number issues, and if the minority considers their numbers as a bargaining chip, for which reason they will want to demand certain things to be done and set conditions precedent before issues of public business, public interest can go through. I see that. A challenge. Peter, do you want to share some thoughts on this very subject matter? How Parliament has done the PR, so to speak, in the eyes of the public. Whether Parliament has made the public to believe that this is indeed a Parliament that is working for all of us, or how they have handled some of the issues that involve their own has not given us the kind of confidence that this is a Parliament that is working for all of us. Peter. I seem to have lost Peter, but the same question to you, Abraham. Also, I mean, if you may want to share some thoughts on the same subject matter. What is the optics looking like for you as a citizen? Over the last 2 years, watching how Parliament has discharged itself on the various issues that come up. I think that we're having challenges with the connection of Abraham as well. I think this will be the best time then that I will take my break. When I come back, we'll continue the conversation with the gentlemen who have been sharing some amazing thoughts about what they think has been the performance of this current 8th Parliament 2 years into its tenure, and then we'll continue with the show. Please do not go away. We'll take a quick break. Right, welcome back. And this is the People's Parliament with me, Sammy Obey. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We're discussing 2 years into the tenure of the 8th Parliament. Network as a deputy editor. And my guests today have been almost on the same page in recognizing that there's been some great positives with the 8th Parliament. It has saved the nation from a lot of things that would have happened if we still maintained an overwhelming majority for the ruling government. They've been able to put the government in check somewhat. Sometimes the delays that they have encouraged has allowed the government to amend its ways. But we have also recognized from our guests that in many of these instances, it has hampered government business. And when they say, when two elephants fight, there's a ground that suffers. So the people of Ghana would eventually be the losers in these instances. Those were some of the thoughts that Ibrahim ended us on. Peter, I see that you're back. May we hear you also? I was asking the question, I'll come to you, Abraham, also on the same question, that do we think that the institution of Parliament, from the optics perspective, from the PR perspective, has done enough to make the people of Ghana know that, it is a Parliament that is serving us well, by way of how they have dealt with their own, by way of how they have dealt with indiscipline in the House and what have you? Peter, have your say.
Right. This is an interesting question. Parliamentarians are missing this, okay? To some extent, they are sent there to represent the people, and they are to report back to the people what has been discussed there. And by extension, we also know that the people are the employers and parliamentarians are the employees. So we, the employers, have sent the employees to Parliament to go and make decisions on our behalf. To some extent, you have to come and report to the people on what is happening in Parliament. Now, currently, almost every constituency in this country has a radio station. If not a radio station, you could have a community radio station. In the time of elections, you see all these parliamentarians walking around, canvassing for votes, using these radio stations and community radio stations. But when they get to Parliament, they don't come to these very radio stations and community radio stations to tell the people what is going on in Parliament, things they are debating on their behalf, things they are signing on their behalf. I mean, giving them updates what is happening. It started very well some time ago with the town hall meetings, right after, I think, in 2017, 2018, and it ended there. We've not seen much when it comes to Parliament telling the people what is happening, unless you are the media type or you like listen to news that you see one or two parliamentarians on City, Joy, Peace, and others telling you about what is happening, and sometimes not in detail, depending on the discussion in the public domain. So PR work from Parliament to the people, had it been that enough? It looks like there's this kind of information asymmetry, because what we think outside is not the same as what they do there. That would say that there has been some positive, but if you go around and ask people about whether parliamentarians are doing so well, you'll be told that, look, they are not serving us, they are not doing well, they are for their pockets. But today we realize that there are some positives. So because of this information asymmetry, the people of Ghana think the parliamentarians are serving their pockets and themselves, and not the people. But to some extent they do. So we have to have the communication done very well. As we speak now, there is a parliamentarian or a parliamentary Facebook account, which I've seen often. They do show proceedings in Parliament. But how many individuals in this country could have enough data to watch parliamentary proceedings for about an hour or two and understand what is happening there? GTV, as the nation's radio mouthpiece, or the mouthpiece of the government, often don't show what is happening in Parliament. Okay, so most of us and many more Ghanaians do not know what is happening in Parliament until something crops out which looks quite of a national concern, then to be raised and expressed by many for about a while, and it ends there. You remember the time that we saw Honorable Katie Amos saying that the youth are not that intelligent to handle certain issues in Ghana. Now, it sends a very huge bad signal to the public, and that also tells you that, look, our people are not represented because we voted for you, and you come back and insult us that we don't have heads, that we have heads to choose at the polls. Okay, so we should help to some extent, not to just train or have parliamentarians who are vocal to only come and advocate things that interest them, but we should have means. I mean, to some extent, we can even translate some of these parliamentary proceedings into other languages for people to understand what is happening, or having people.
Certainly, there is a need for greater outreach, by parliamentarians as individuals, by the institution of parliament, so that the citizens who voted them, can be able to have a better understanding of what's going on in parliament, and not just the means through which parliamentary proceedings are broadcast on Facebook and the like, which excludes a few people. And those are the thoughts that you share there. Peter, let me hear your thoughts on the same question, Abraham.
Well, when Peter mentioned that there was the need to give Parliament a voice to send the work they are doing out there, what came to mind immediately is this: you would realize that members of Parliament who hold ministerial positions tend to have a lot of publicity, because their job assignments gives them the opportunity to interact with the communities that they visit on official duties. And so I can understand the clamor for ministerial positions whenever a new parliament is about to be inaugurated, in the sense that the trend over the years has always been the case. If you have a ministerial appointment, you have a greater chance of your constituents hearing more of you, seeing more of you on the limited PR system that works for them as we speak: TV stations, radio stations, and then those who choose to go a bit sophisticated, the internet and the Facebooks and all that. What I can say is that it is still a responsibility of every member of parliament to clearly devise a way or a means to get the message out there. If you sit and ride in your V8 in Accra, and your constituents don't see you, but only see you during Ramadan, during Christmas, during that popular person's funeral, you're going to have this issue of feeling that people are not even appreciating you for the effort that you are putting in, and all that. So for me, who deals with the grassroots a lot, I think that they, to some extent, have even shot themselves in the foot by some of their very own actions, utterances, and the like. It is not all doom and gloom, but then we, the ordinary voters, we those who are not on their payrolls, we expect them to engage with us more. We expect them to ramp up the education and the awareness campaigns, so that we can give credit when it is due, and then we will criticize accordingly to when we must. But in all, I think that they have done a good job. They can do better, but then they need to take their own destinies into their own hands. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I hear you, gentlemen, predict some form of doom if nothing is done in the second half on the fortunes of these parliamentarians at the polls. In that, whereas the institution of parliament has been able to save us from a couple of messy situations, if individual members of parliament do not go back home and do not broadcast the information to their home people and do not get their home people along, then elections will come up. And of course, we're having even primaries for some of the major political parties as soon as a few weeks from now. We may be losing out on a number of members of parliament, which contributes to the high attrition situation that we find in parliament. Ibrahim, do members of parliament that you engage with on a daily basis on the floor of parliament, on the corridors of parliament, within the parliamentary enclave, do they fear that they are going to lose their seats though?
They do, and you mentioned the day of reckoning. For the NDC MPs, that's 13th of next month, May, and some have actually started filing their nominations already. Fortunately for some of them, they are going unopposed. And you see, Sammy, that's what the discussion is all about. That if you did put in the work, and the work you put in is visible, you wouldn't have even competition. So, for instance, Haruna Idris has gone unopposed, Samuel Okunita-Ablakwa unopposed, Dr. Clementa Park unopposed, Dr. Kesiela Tuposa unopposed, a number of them. Of course, that's not to say that those who are being given competition have not performed. But the point we're making is that aside putting in the work, let your constituents know that indeed you put in the work by making yourself visible. Some who will tell you that you don't have to speak on the floor of parliament to prove to your constituents that you are working. Well, in my experience as a parliamentary correspondent, and some of you know that you do. Let nobody deceive you as a member of parliament that you don't have to speak on the floor to prove you are working. You do. Because the work is not only at the committee level, neither is the work only at the constituency level. Even when you are in constituency working, not every community in your constituency can tell that you are working. So when you are sent to parliament to come and represent people, don't just represent them, but let them see you do it. Peter talked about the Facebook page, and that's one thing that parliament has done well, Sammy, that is worth mentioning. Through the Facebook engagement, the live streaming on Facebook, many more Ghanaians are able to be party to happiness in parliament. Now, if you go to the Facebook page during a session, look at the numbers and compare the numbers to the 7 parliaments. Realize that there's a marked difference between the numbers now and what used to be the case in the 7 parliament. That tells you one thing. Ghanaians are now much more interested in the work of parliament because they have high expectations of this particular parliament. And that's how come it's difficult for the House to meet those expectations, because trust me, those expectations are very high. In fact, at the point, many people felt if the president does something wrong, Parliament should come in and rectify it. Or if the president is supposed to do something, or the executive is supposed to do something and it's not been able to do it, it's the work of Parliament to do it. And Peter, in a way, mentioned it, that why are we headed to the IMF if Parliament was putting in the work as it ought to? Yes, maybe it's the 7th Parliament, but I'm not sure anybody can blame the 8th Parliament for we going to the IMF. Or why are we doing debt restructuring? You are aware, and I'm sure viewers are equally aware, that Parliament as an institution has constantly demanded that the debt restructuring in its current form must come to Parliament for scrutiny. That demand has been on the table, culminating into the establishment of a committee to scrutinize that. In fact, an emotion has been admitted in that regard, which has been advertised, to ensure that the domestic debt reduction program, the document properly so called, or the entire debt restructuring program is brought to the House. So yes, the MPs will have a day of reckoning, as I mentioned. That of MPP is deferred. It could be a good thing. It could equally be a bad thing. What I know is that given the economic crisis we find ourselves in, and given the demands on members of parliament, and given the fact that government is unable to even release statutory funds, including MP's common fund and what have you, it will be a difficult and challenging time for incumbent MPs to retain their seats, be it through the primaries or the general elections.
Right. So we're in for some rather severe attrition situation, and we know that the rate of attrition in parliamentary work can have a very big toll on the performance of any parliament. But we will take a quick break. When we come back, we will go into our special segment of recapping for our viewers what happened in Parliament last week and what is expected to take place in Parliament in the coming week. And that will be done for us by my colleague Clement Akola when we come back from the break. And then, of course, once Clement wraps that up, I'll come for your closing words as guests who have joined us today, even as we walk closer to the end of today's broadcast. So please do not go away. This is still the People's Parliament with me, Samuel Obey. We've been discussing first 2 years of Ghana's 8th Parliament. Has it lived up to the expectation? We'll be taking some citizens' perspective from colleagues and it's been an interesting, lively one. We'll go for a break. When we come back, we'll continue. Stay tuned. Welcome back. This is the People's Parliament with me, Sami Obey, and thank you very, very much for continuing to connect with us on the People's Parliament. Today on the People's Parliament, we've been discussing the first 2 years of Ghana's 8th Parliament, whether it has been living up to the citizens' expectation as a hung parliament. And we received very interesting perspectives from Peter Kofi, founding president of the Institute for Liberty and Policy Innovation, Abraham Essiem, who is a rapporteur and policy analyst. He works as director for the Institute of Electoral Studies, and of course, a parliamentary correspondent with EIB Network, Ibrahim Al-Hassan, who have been sharing thoughts with us. Now we are moving straight into the Last Week in Parliament segment. Of course, that will be followed immediately by This Week in Parliament. And to do that, we have my colleague, communications officer here at Parliamentary Network Africa, Clement Akolo, to walk us through what happened in Parliament last week and what is expected to happen in the House in the coming week. Clement, please take us away.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Welcome to the Last Week and This Week in Parliament segment on the People's Parliament Public Service broadcast. My name is Clement Akolo, as the host said. This is where we give you all the information concerning what happened in Parliament in the week under review, and also give you heads up about the agenda of Parliament in the week ahead. So in this week, definitely the highlight for this week was the debate on the President's message on the State of the Nation address. You remember that about 2 weeks ago, the President gave a State of the Nation address to Parliament. And then after that, the MPs have been debating this particular message that was sent by the President. So the motion was that this House thanks His Excellency the President for the message on the state of the nation, which he delivered to Parliament on Wednesday, 8 March 2023, moved by Honorable Member for Efutu and Deputy Majority Leader, Mr. Alexander Afenyo-Markin, on Thursday, 9 March 2023, and seconded by the Honorable Member for Bolgatanga Central and Deputy Ranking Member of the Finance Committee, Mr. Isaac Adongo. This motion ran through the business of the week until it was concluded upon by the two leaders of the House on Friday. Certainly, the narrative was that the minority side saw nothing writing home about the President's message, while the majority side have hailed the President for his message. And we know that this is a yearly ritual that the two political parties or major political parties in the House are always at loggerheads when it comes to matters of policy. So the majority side hailed the President for his message to the nation, and the minority side see nothing writing home about what the President said. So there were some questions that were answered as well in the House. So there were about 48 questions. Some of the Minister for Fisheries came in, but a lot of the questions were also not answered because some of the members of Parliament who filed them were not around to answer them. And then, more importantly, there were also some statements on the floor of Parliament. And I mean, high upon or among the statements that were made were this includes a statement by Honorable Member for Jomoro, Ms. Dorcas Toffee, on police brutality meted out to Mr. Shadrach Alor at the West Hills Mall in Weija on Monday, 30th January 2023, resulting in his tragic, untimely death, and called on the chair to refer the incident to the Committee on Defense and Interior to investigate and report. We all remember this incident where there was public uproar about this particular incident where a young man just lost his life just like that. So the MPs commented on this issue on the floor of Parliament. There was another very important statement that was made on the floor of Parliament in the week under review, where the Honorable Member for South Tongu and ranking member of the Committee on Youth and Sports and Culture, Mr. Kobna Mensah Woyome, paid tribute in memory of the former Black Stars player, Mr. Christian Atsu Trosam. And this same statement also was made by the Honorable Member for Adan, Ms. Comfordoyo, who also eulogized the late Black Stars player, Mr. Atsu Trosam, who lost his life in the earthquake that struck Turkey and Syria on Monday, 6 February 2023. And this incident, we are all aware of it. I mean, it was something that took the Ghanaians by surprise. We were hoping that we hear something better, but at long last, we couldn't hear anything better. But he's been buried, and there was a state burial on his behalf on the forecourt of Parliament as well. So these were some of the things that happened on the floor of Parliament. During the week, there were some petitions by the Nooks who came to petition the House about the capping of the GET fund. It was one of the issues that also featured, but it was not on the floor of Parliament. It was at the sidelines of parliamentary sittings. Now let's look at the next week in Parliament, some of the things that will be coming up in Parliament next week. Of course, there are some questions that are coming up as well. There are about 45 questions to be answered by ministers during this week. And chief among them is Mr. Chumesi Kwame Ampofo to ask the Minister for Sanitation and Water Resources when the following communities in his constituencies will be getting water. And then you come to what I call some of the papers that will be presented, some very important papers. A while ago, I talked about the GET fund. There will be presentation of proposed formula for distribution or distributing the District Assembly's Common Fund for the year 2023, and then proposed formula for the distribution of the Ghana Education Trust Fund and for the year 2023, and proposed formula for the disbursement of the National Health Insurance Fund for the year 2023. These are some of the important things aside the questions that will be coming on the floor of Parliament. And then one important motion that I also want to bring your attention to is that this Honorable House adopts the 28th report of the Appointment Committee on His Excellency the President nominations for appointment as justices for the Supreme Court. That this Honorable House adopts the 30th report of the Appointment Committee on His Excellency President nomination for appointment as ministers and of state and deputy ministers. A while ago, when IB was talking, he mentioned that this has become a bone of contention on the floor of Parliament, and the minority is staying its grounds, protesting against the increment of the ministers, as well as protesting against the introduction of the EC's CI, and therefore they are using this as a bargaining chip to keep themselves in there. So these are some of the things that are ahead of us in the week ahead, which we want to bring to your attention. So at this juncture, I would just let the baton to my able host, Sami Obeng, to continue with the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much for giving us a wrap of what's happened in Parliament last week and giving us a peek into what is expected to be happening in Parliament this week. Of course, the State of the Nation's address, the debate on the State of the Nation's address concluded, as you said, last week, which is tradition. Whenever President presents the State of the Nation's address, MPs debate it from both sides of the House until they are able to reach a consensus on some issues. There were some questions, there were statements, and of course, there was the petition by the National Union of Ghana students and some other education-based CSOs on the capping of the GETS fund. You have given us indication that this week there will be questions, there will be statements, and there will be other conversations happening on the floor of Parliament. Abraham, on the top of your minds with what has been presented, are there any of the issues to be discussed in Parliament this week, or are there any of the issues that happened in Parliament last week that caught your attention when Clement was presenting? Maybe I start with you, Ibrahim.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the much awaited report of the Appointments Committee. It cannot be that ministerial nominees have been vetted for more than 1 month. And because the majority is unable to marshal its numbers, given the decision by the minority not to approve them, the approval has been outstanding since. At least the majority should show up for their own, get these nominees approved. So at least they can contribute their quota to revamping the economy and helping the president address the economic crisis that we find ourselves in.
Well, Ivy, you not to interject you, the whole Sami, but Ivy, why is the majority not able to marshal their own numbers? Is it that their in-house misgivings about who is getting the appointment or not? Because I find it quite interesting that you need your government machine functioning.
Yeah. In fact, that's a very interesting question. Let me tell you. The majority has 138. So out of the 138, there's a deputy minister who is a woman, deputy minister for roads and highways, who took seat and is in the US. She's delivered, but she's still in the US as we speak. So she's unavailable. So that brings the number down to 137. Again, we are aware, Dom Kwabena and Pisara Josafo. Now she comes in tri-weekly. So 3 weeks, she comes in once just to satisfy the constitutional requirements and then leaves. Her issue has been outstanding as to whether she still can hold herself as an MP or not. That is one issue that Parliament will have to deal with. That has been outstanding. And so we can also say that she will be there. If she doesn't come, that brings the number on the side of the majority to 136, same as that of the minority. It's a risk if this report is tabled when the numbers are even on both sides. It means the motion will be lost, and then these 6 nominees will fail to be approved as members of as ministers of state. What then will mean is that that will mean then is that the president will have to nominate them for them to go through the entire process all over again. It's a risk that is not worth taking. If you remember, that's how come the majority chief whip, Frank Anodompre, pleaded with the minority to back down on their position and that they are not going to approve these nominees. He knew that it was going to be difficult for him to marshal his own numbers. Again, don't rule out the fact that the others who feel they might have been more competent to occupy these positions and will not show up.
Very well. And so those are very interesting dynamics. The very reason why every single member of Parliament, the institution of Parliament, the majority side, the minority side, they must be held accountable for their actions and inactions. If the whole country can be brought to a standstill, a whole ministry can live many weeks without ministers, simply because those who are supposed to execute government business, the government's own members of Parliament, decides that for one reason or the other, they are not showing up in Parliament. If the Speaker of Parliament is failing to crack the whip on a member of Parliament who has been recalcitrant and has failed to show up and has broken all the rules so far as parliamentary attendance is concerned, if all of these things are happening, then of course we do not expect that our parliament will function as effectively as we all expected. So back to our subject matter so that we can be able to wrap up for today. Let me start with you, Abraham. So what are your chief recommendations? First 2 years gone. For the next 2 years, what do you say that the Parliament of Ghana should be doing better so that it can end the 4-year run as a parliament that served the people of Ghana better?
Well, first and foremost, I believe that each of them gave us the impression that they had Mother Ghana at heart. And so having gotten there, the expectation from the ordinary voter is that these people will uphold the highest standards in terms of commitment to work delivery and serviceability. However, IB has rightly clarified a lot of things for me. We are not having that happening. I would wish that the hung parliament situation will be a serious learning curve for each and every one of them, and this should influence the decision of the parties who endorse, who they support, who they encourage to run for parliament. Parliamentary business is serious business. We all these bills that have been tabled that have not been addressed, though all those that have dragged on over the past months, it is simply because there's an obvious lack of commitment on the part of some MPs. You use the word recalcitrant, which I would hesitate a bit in using, but you are basically left with no other easier word to use. Ghana must come first. If we want to develop this country, we must be seen as a people who are committed to the task ahead, and we must galvanize forces to take this country where we want to see it at. I have had the opportunity to visit parliaments in other countries. I have seen senators in the US, and I have seen the commitment to work. Sami, we are talking about billionaires, people with heritage money who come to Congress with their own private helicopters, limousines. But you will not see this level of absenteeism. You will not see this level of a laid-back approach to the business of the House. It becomes a bit frustrating for us. It is almost as if we take advantage of the ignorance of the average Ghanaian, and we ride on this ignorance. 4 years comes and goes. We say this, we say that. Nobody's really penalized for not doing what they are supposed to do. We are burning serious taxpayer money, but then the ultimate goals are not achieved. Look at how long it took us to even pass the right to information. Look at how long it has taken us to pass the National Blood Service Bill. I mean, it becomes heart-wrenching if your love for this country is as high as mine is. And so, in conclusion, I want this hung parliament situation to be a learning curve for each and every aspiring member of parliament, and then to the political parties, who they support, who they choose to put out there to represent them as a party, to serve the interests of their constituents, is very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Abraham. Yes, Ibrahim, what are your thoughts, recommendations going forward the next 2 years?
Well, I dread, Sami, unfortunately, I dread the next 2 years. When I say I dread the next 2 years, I'm speaking specifically from the majority side. So even now, the party has not gone for primaries. So potentially every MP who wants to return has a chance of returning and is convinced that he or she will be retained. Imagine after the primaries, when some MPs on the side of government lose their seats, the opposition is encouraged to always show up because they have their eyes on the bigger picture of probably getting power come 2024. So there is that reward scheme. So the opposition MPs are encouraged to come. What I fear is a parliament that cannot work because government cannot muster its own MPs to come to parliament to work. And that's something that if we sound our alarm bells now, maybe the leadership will listen, and it explains how come the primaries of the governing party has equally not been decided yet relative to the date. But of course, I think there must be a bigger picture, just like Abraham talked about. It's not just about the pegs. It's not just about whether you are a minister or not, whether you got an appointment or not. You representing your people must count. And that counting must start by you showing some level of seriousness relative to your work as a member of parliament. And how can you be serious if you don't show up and get the work done? So that orientation needs to be had. The leaders on the side of the majority will equally have to set up. And if need be, the president will have to meet his MPs again, trash out everything that there is to trash out. Otherwise, like I said, as the nation that suffers, like we said earlier, because government business will stall, not because the minority has refused to do business with government, but largely because government's own MPs are refusing to show up and be counted, basically. But of course, I see a very interesting 8th parliament. Are we likely to have another hung parliament again? No, maybe not in the next 4 elections. I'm sure lessons have been learned, and I agree with Abraham that let's build upon what has been achieved. We had higher expectations. If our expectations were about 100, let's just say we've gotten 60. That's above average. We can make do with that. But the onus lies on Speaker to ensure that at least he lives on a very high note as well, especially as the first speaker from an opposition party.
Absolutely. And yes, indeed, of the 275 members of parliament, my panel has been added them on the fact that there's been some serious ones. They're going about parliamentary business in a very serious manner. There are some very unserious ones also who have left the business of parliament in a way that, leaves much to be desired. Yet these are all people who are expected to represent the people of Ghana that have elected them to be in those high seats, to stand in for the people of Ghana, to oversee the government, to make laws, and also to ensure that there is representation of the people. This has been the People's Parliament with me, Samuel Obeng. I have enjoyed the company of Peter Bismarck-Kofi, founding president of the Institute for Liberty and Policy Innovation, as well as Abraham Essiem. Abraham Essiem is a rapporteur and policy analyst. He works as director at the Institute for Electoral Studies. Of course, we've also been joined by Ibrahim Al-Hassan, is a parliamentary correspondent with the EIB network, a journalist who monitors parliament on a daily basis. And of course, it is the two, Abraham and Ibrahim, who wrapped up my show this afternoon. My name is Samuel Obeng. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Remember that the People's Parliament comes your way every Monday from 4 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. and it is live on Facebook Live. You can access it at Parliamentary Network Africa. And of course, you can follow us for all of the previous episodes of the People's Parliament on YouTube, Parliamentary Network Africa. On Twitter, you can tweet at us at PN Africa Watch. Parliamentary Network Africa ensures that parliaments are open, accountable, transparent, and encourages citizens' participation. And that's the very, very reason that this initiative of the People's Parliament has been instituted, where we hold parliament accountable. See you again next week. Thank you very much to the crew here at PN Africa that has made this possible, to our amazing guests who joined us and made this possible. We look forward to engaging with you again next week. Goodbye. Thank you very much.